Hi, my name is Megan Shipman and I am one of the student workers at the equipment checkout room at the College of Journalism. And today I'm going to teach you guys some intermediate level skills on using the Canon 6D. And you can also use these skills when you're shooting with other types of cameras as well. So what we're going to talk about today is the 3 things you need to know when you're shooting in manual mode. And those 3 things are aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. The first thing I'm going to talk to you about is kind of the descriptions of the 3 of those. So to start, we'll talk about ISO. So ISO is the speed at which light is absorbed at the sensor of the camera. So the higher the ISO is, the faster light will be absorbed. So to figure out your ISO, it kind of depends on the lighting where you are shooting. So if you're shooting like outside or in a bright place on a sunny day, you would use lower numbers, so like 100, 200, 400. And if it's a darker situation, you'd use the numbers like 800, 1600, 3200, or 6400. And then for aperture works kind of like a valve. It lets in a certain amount of light, and aperture is measured in f-stops. So at f2.8, for example, that's when the most light gets let in, and at f22, that's when the least amount of light gets let in. So it's kind of the opposite to ISO. Aperture also controls the depth of field of your picture. So the smaller the f-stop, the less that is in focus, and the bigger the f-stop, the more that's in focus. Finally, there's shutter speed. So shutter speed is the duration of time. It is not the speed of the shutter. A lot of people think it's the speed of the shutter, and that would be false. So the shutter speed is always expressed as a fraction. For example, 1 over 30 is 1/30th of a second, and then 1 over 8,000 would be like 1 over 8,000th of a second. This also is our blur control. So all 3 of these things, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, all work together to properly expose your picture, so they kind of represent like a triangle. You want to balance each one out.
Action.
So this is the screen that will show you your adjustments and numbers that you need to know for your ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. So I'm going to show you how to adjust each one. So to start off, we'll do ISO. And to do this, you'll press down the ISO button, and you'll see it. Everything else leaves the screen. It just shows your ISO number. So right now it's set at 3200, and if we're shooting on like a bright sunny day, we'll want to move that all the way down to like 400. Okay, the next thing I will be showing you how to switch is your aperture. So that is expressed through this number right here where it says 9.0. To change this, you will use the dial on the body of the camera to the right of your screen and twist it, and as you can see, you can change it. We will just set it at 4.0 for right now, and then once you get that set where you want it, a good thing to do is to lock it. So right below the dial, there's a lock switch, and it says lock by it, and you just press that up. And now when you use that scroll thing, you can't change it on accident. Finally, I'll show you how to change the shutter speed, and that's the easiest one to change. To do that, you just use this top scroll on the top of your camera, and as you can see, the numbers change. And yep, so that's probably the setting you'll want to change last. So now I'm going to show you guys where each thing is on the screen. So to start off, shutter speed is represented right here. Right now it's set at 1/250. And aperture is right here. Right now it is set at f4.0. And ISO is right here. Right now it is set at 3200. And then this little grid right here is the lighting meter, where you can see what needs to be changed to get all three balanced out. So you want it to be, the white dot to be under 0. So to capture a good picture, you are going to have to learn how to balance out all three things, so ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. So right now I have my aperture set on f10, and by looking at this meter to the left, you can see that the white dot shows that I am not balanced out. You want the white dot to be underneath the 0 or as close to the 0 as possible. So I'm going to change my shutter speed so the white dot is underneath 0. And there it is. So now I'm good to take my picture. And as you can see, the picture turned out good. So the first thing I like to do is change my aperture, or decide what I want my aperture to be at. If I want the background blurred, I'd have it as low as it'll go. If I want everything to be in focus, I'd have it as high as it can go. So for this, I'm gonna have it as low as it'll go and have the plant being focused and the background not being focused. So there it is. So as you can see, the meter is telling us that now there is not a balance between the three things. So now I'm going to change my ISO. So I'm going to move it down. Let's start out by moving it to 6400, which actually is perfect because the dot is below the 0. But let's move it down a little bit so I can show you what you would do if it's not quite in focus still. I mean, not quite lined up still. So now you can see that the meter shows that it is not balanced. So now finally I would change my shutter speed and finally get that all balanced out. So now all three things are balanced, and the picture turns out good. So that's kind of the steps I would go in if I were you, to decide what numbers you need to have. That meter comes in handy so much. I use that every time I take a picture, and like I said, it kind of depends whether you want to start off by changing your ISO or aperture. Because obviously if you're indoors, you'll more than likely use a higher ISO than if you are outdoors. And if you want everything to be in focus, then you'd use a higher aperture than you would if you only want the one thing to be in focus. So it kind of just depends on those two things. And then the last thing you'll do almost always is change your shutter speed. One thing you want to look out for with shutter speed is if you are not using a tripod, the lower your number is, if it's below 100, 1/100, it's more likely that your picture is going to turn out blurry, because that means your shutter is open longer, which gives you more time to shake, which will then make the picture blurry. So you want to make sure that if you are taking your picture by holding the camera, you want to make sure that your number is over 1/100. Another thing to look out for is this little meter right here. You want it to be like right around 0, that little white dot below the numbers. That means your picture should turn out and nothing else needs to be adjusted. So as you can see, it is well adjusted here. So that concludes my video on intermediate skills that you'll need to know when using your Canon 6D. I will have one more video coming out after this one where I'll show you how to use the video mode on the camera as well as a self timer and any other extra things on the camera.